It's like, I love this alley culture. It's like there's all this stuff happening in the alleys. There's people living in the alleys. It's
Yeah,
hilarious.
living. Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, I think everyone realizes this at some point, even just visiting Hudson. The old adage back in the dinner party days, we used to have this saying you couldn't walk 10 feet in Hudson without getting invited to a dinner party, which you wanted to avoid because there were so many, it was too many of them. So you went into the alley and you walked down the alley. But then there was this horrible, it's like a Twilight Zone kind of twist where then you ran into everyone in the alley that was trying to avoid everyone on Warren Street and you got into a dinner party. So it was just, there was no hope.
Down in the valley, moved up from the city. It's a new way of living and I'm trying to get used to it. One park coolers have an ounce of an idiot. Ordered a Manhattan and they call me a Cidiot. At first I hurt my feelings, but it's kinda got a ring to it. When you move to the country, they can tell when you're new to it. I'm looking at a place, but I'm trying to keep fitting in. It takes too long to be a local, so for now I'm a Cidiot.
I'm Matt Zucker, and this is Cidiot, learning to live and love life in the Hudson Valley. Okay, I'm in a small city now, but so far, I'm still a Cidiot. Cidiot, after all, is about being new, getting acclimated, getting your wobbly legs like a baby goat. So I promise to continue to cover more of the larger 10-county Hudson Valley. FDR in Hyde Park is coming. More in the Catskills, the ferries that connect the two sides, idiosyncrasies, art, culture, maybe real estate. But part of capturing the experience through my eyes is following my eye and legs. New here in Hudson, I wander down streets, peek into windows, get Brian to try new restaurants, and most of all, meet new people. On Instagram, I started to follow Mark Allen after seeing his video, Are Hudson Sidewalks Safe for New York City's Tourists? It was hilarious. Done like an insider-outsider can do, poking fun, and unintentionally, I learned, causing change. Mark Allen isn't an amateur, though. A filmmaker, a writer, a radio host, a go-go boy. He is prolific and provocative. And he's here. Mark and I both grew up in the 70s and 80s, though I was not a go-go boy. I did not contribute to the New York Times. I was not featured in paper magazine. The closest I got to Madonna was staying home from school, pretending to be sick to watch True Blue Tuesday, a 24-hour marathon of user-submitted videos to the hit song on MTV. I figured Mark would help me shortcut this experience of getting to know the town of Hudson. I wanted to know what it was like, what we Cidiots should know, and more about why things are the way they are. So I reached out to him like a fanboy. And guess what? He wrote back. Come hear about art and culture. Come hear about Hudson's waves of gaze. Come down the back alleys of Hudson, New York. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Matt.
Thanks for coming on Cidiot.
Of course, I'm honored to be here. My compliments for using such a controversial word as the title of your podcast. I'm very impressed.
Yeah, it's funny. I've got a little backlash too, but I kind of like it.
Good.
Yeah. And you're kind of a celebrity, so this is kind of the honor is kind of mine to have you here.
Well, thank you. I hope I can live up to that.
Well, I'm new to Hudson, but I'd love to know what your relationship to the Hudson Valley is, and then of course to Hudson.
Well, my story is very similar probably to a lot of people's stories. I'm an ex-city person. I lived in New York City from 1990 to 2008. And I reached that point in New York City that all city dwellers do, where they're like, I have to get out of here. And there's the seductive lure of upstate New York, where you see so many ex-city people moving and living in these lush, foresty and valley-like places and countless little towns. And at the time, my boyfriend at the time, artist Jim Cruson, he had already moved to Hudson, and he fell into the situation where there was this enormous house in Catskill for rent. And it was time for my lease to be renewed. And I just went ahead and said, you know what? Now's the time. And we moved up to this big house in Catskill. I spent like 6 months decompressing, and learning to live with bugs and things like that.
Right.
And I loved it. I was in heaven, and I felt all the city was just kind of melting away from me. Now, we lived in Catskill, but what was interesting is we worked and spent all our time in Hudson across the river, because Hudson was very happening at the time. When I first moved up here, I had a lot of things going on in the city. I had a weekly radio show. I had an event going on at Dixon Place. I was still a freelance writer. And so I had to go back to the city every week. But as time passed on, one by one, those things fell away. I decided, when the schedule changed, I decided not to come back to the radio. WFMU, the show at Dixon Place, which is called Pitch, ended. The freelance stuff started to kind of like dissolve, and then I realized I could do it all remotely up here, and I started going to the city less and less and less. And now it's really strange, because I've been here so long. I realized I haven't been back to the city in probably 3 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I never thought that anything like that would happen, but I guess I'm comfortable here.
Can I ask about Madonna?
Sure.
I kind of have to ask about Madonna.
So I think I'd sent you a paper interview with Michael Musto, and I talked about experience. So in my city years in the 90s, particularly in the 90s, I was a big club celebrity, minor celebrity. And I hung out with all those people, all the club kids and all that stuff. And so the story, I had several experiences with Madonna. But, before I moved to New York City, in the 80s, it was very cool to move to the city. And there was this kind of like rite of passage that you would meet Andy Warhol. Mm-hmm. And everyone's like, oh, I met Andy here, or I shook his hand, or I saw him at Palladium or whatever. But then Andy died, I think in 89. I can't remember the year. So in my opinion, Madonna kind of became the abstract version of him, because now suddenly everyone wanted to go to the city and have a Madonna. I met her. She was at a party. I saw her, whatever. And I had several instances where I was around her. But there was one, I was dancing, I was a go-go dancer, and I was dancing at the Roxy, and she was there to hand deliver a copy of her 12-inch of the song Deeper and Deeper to Frankie Knuckles. He was the DJ who I knew. And everyone was talking like, oh, she's up in the DJ booth, whatever, that thing where people pretend to look at her, but they're not to look at her, but they're looking at her. And then at some point later, she came over with an assistant or something, and she said my name. I was on by my go-go box, and she's like, "Are you Mark Allen?" And I was just stunned, like, how and she goes, "I'm having this audition. We're auditioning dancers, blah, blah, blah. This guy's going to give you a card." And then she didn't even shake my hand or anything. And she walked away. I wish to God someone had taken a photo. But she walked away, and then I went to the audition, which was like the next day. And it was a cattle call. I thought it was going to be this thing where I, met with her privately, but there was no time for that. There was a million people there. And I was literally like that girl at the beginning of Fame, the movie, where she does that dance, sure. Asked me to do pirouettes and stuff like that. I didn't even know what a pirouette was. So I was quickly eliminated. I only saw her at the end. She was way up on the top on this table. I remember she was wearing all pink. And that was it. Then flash forward like 5 or 6 years later, I was working as a doorman at Sound Factory I was outside with Rob Fernandez and Frankie Knuckles. And I was talking about this story, and Frankie was standing right there. And I goes, I don't know why she just singled me out. She came over, and Frankie goes, I do, because I sent her over to you. I told her your name and said, go talk to Mark Allen. So I thought that was so sweet. And it was such a nice, so that's that Madonna story. Everybody has one.
I don't have one. My only Madonna story is staying home from school, calling in sick to watch True Blue Tuesday on MTV, where for 24 hours, they played all the user-generated videos of True Blue. That's it. That's my Madonna story.
I was there too. I was doing the same thing as a kid, little kid.
I was like, I have a bad stomach, and I just sit up and watch TV all day.
It's because when you live in New York City, and this, you're around famous, important people. They're just your neighbors. And so the chance of that happening is going to be. And, I find Hudson is actually very similar. I worked on Warren Street in a lot of the antique shops for a number of years. I can't tell you the number of famous people that came in and I dealt with and talked to about furniture, like J-Lo and Sigourney Weaver and Bette Midler. And who else? Who else was there?
I see Al Roker on the street.
Al
see
Roker. Yes.
Malcolm Gladwell, obviously.
I saw Tina Louise one time.
Ooh.
Yeah, Hudson draws like famous people. They come in.
What was it like when you first moved up here? What was Hudson like?
There, when I first left the city and I lived in the Lower East Side, I'd always lived in rough spaces. So when I moved up here into Catskill, and we had this big house that was kind of falling apart, but huge. And there was this decompression that I felt physically and definitely mentally, where I didn't want to do anything. I felt my body was like telling me, just relax. I felt all this tension just kind of melting off of me. And this lasted months. And there was this Jim, my partner, Jim, did the same thing. It was like all the tension from all the years in the city, and New York City can be a very tense place, started to melt away. And any sort of ambition we had, kind of melted away. And it's interesting being in such a quiet space in upstate New York. I was used to the constant roar of the city in the background that when I moved up here, it was so quiet, I could hear the blood pulsing in my ears. And that began to bother me, the quiet of everything. Like I started to go crazy from that. It was definitely an adjustment. But after that 6-month period passed, I felt healthier and cleaner. And
I love the quiet.
And, I kind of lost, in the city, you want to do this and you want to do that and you want to do this. But when I moved up here, I never really regained that. I've always been kind of, since I've been up here, I just kind of take things as they come. I don't have the go-getter, attitude that you have in the city that I think comes kind of naturally. So I kind of lost that, but still I stay active and do a lot of things.
Brian and I always knew Hudson is very progressive, and we only live 20 minutes south in Tivoli. But I am struck by how gay it is. Like, this is like as gay as Chelsea was when we lived there. Was it always like this, or is it different?
Yes. So the story is Hudson in the 1970s, was really having a bad time. It was falling apart. There were a lot of boxed up storefronts, and there was a drug problem, and there was a crime problem. It was one of these upstate towns that was kind of falling apart. There were people that definitely moved up here in the 70s and particularly the 80s, like some really brave, like souls from New York City. But in the 90s, this wave of gay men kind of invaded the city and moved into Hudson and began opening up little stores, particularly antique stores, and fixing up houses. And they really changed the city. There's a lot of controversy too, because a lot of people felt like they colonized the city. And all that was in the 90s, and that was a long time ago. And now those people, a lot of them are still here. So they become like, they work in city council, they're in the government, they're the mayor, they're this and that, and they run all these places and these committees and things and now they
like
kind
old money.
Yeah, in a way it's like old gay money, so yes, Hudson has always had waves of gay people in it, kind of revitalizing the city. It's a little controversial, but it's a very gay place. And in fact, if you look at a lot of these like Facebook groups where they have these Facebook groups, community groups, the people that live in like the Fairview Avenue area, and they're considered like the old locals. They don't like that. They'll, insult the city by calling it gay antique city. And they try to categorize it as this thing. Why did you ruin our city? All these bougie restaurants and everything. But it came from a gay thing. Now, I will say that when Jim and I moved up here, we were still quite young. We were in our 30s. I mean, if that's young. But we noticed back then there weren't a lot of places to go to in Hudson. There was just a few restaurants and like one bar, and it was a pretty dead street at night. And the thing that everyone socialized with was dinner parties. And we would go to these, Jim and I would go to these dinner parties, and everyone was just like about a decade older than us. And they were very like, it was a very kind of a bougie atmosphere. There'd be these like people arguing over like parsley and cilantro and like, these perfect table settings, and people talking about Barbara, and Judy. And it was a different generation. And we'd be sitting there in butthole surfers t-shirts and be like, what the hell? Like, we went from like the Lower East Side to this. It was like jumping ahead a few generations. Right. That's kind of on now, that you don't see, the dinner party scene isn't really happening much anymore. Now there's so many restaurants and cafes.
That's too bad. I've got this great dining room table in storage.
We should bring it back, Matt. It's due for a revival. Let's sit there and argue about parsley and cilantro.
Yeah, I don't mind being bougie. I just don't want to be douchey.
I love that phrase, bougie versus douchey.
The one way I got to know you was through your videos, which are like these great satires on Hudson. But you're poking fun, and I see it like as an outsider, but you're an insider. So I just wanted to ask you about them. I mean, I saw the Sidewalk Safe video recently, and then I went back and I saw an earlier one on more the colonialism. Tell us about the videos. They're really fun. They've obviously taken off, so they're really popular.
Thank you. When I first moved to Hudson, had that bouginess to it, but there was also, it was like the Wild West. And there were a lot of young people here like us. And there was a vibrant kind of rebellious street art scene. And there were a lot of happenings and like noise music shows and bizarre, pop-up art galleries in an alley somewhere. And it was almost like Austin, Texas or something in the 80s. That's still here a little bit, but not as much anymore. I thought it was interesting how that kind of faded away over time. That energy definitely left, and now things are very respectable. Galleries are very like nice, and everything's tied to like Bard and things like that. So that element of that guerrilla art and that sort of thing is gone. So I just kind of craved it. And I always admired people. Some of my favorite artists in Hudson are people that like sell their work directly on the street, or they kind of circumvent the gallery system, and they're not applying for grants or go to Art Omi and things like that. I was already doing videos that were like ASMR parodies, but this person started a meme account called the Hudson Whale, and it really inspired me. And they became famous very fast. You should interview them. They started to do these really crass punk commentaries about just this small city in meme form. And he spawned a lot of imitators. And I was amazed by this. I loved that this person did this he established an art presence in Hudson with like sarcasm, things like that. And I was very impressed. They actually inspired me to make those videos. The first one I did was a parody of a song about Hudson, and I filmed myself in a tuxedo, and I'm dancing to the song and singing about Hudson, but I'm at like the dump, and I'm at the graveyard, and I'm in front of some trash and things like that. And then it just became something that I did creatively that I felt like doing.
I feel like you're helping Hudson maintain its edge a little bit, so it doesn't become so polished and uptight the way some other towns have become.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm helping as much as I'm just channeling something that's already there. It's funny. There's so much gossip in this town. Everyone gossips behind closed doors or out on Warren Street. They're like, oh, can you believe this? And did you hear this? And blah, blah, blah. And what about this character? And what about that character? But then when it comes to like being public in their blog or on social media or at a town meeting, everyone's very respectable. And I think they tend to censor themselves. Not always, but usually I find that's true. So I think these meme accounts and my videos and many other artists in Hudson and this whole area, all this town upstate. Remember, we're ex-New Yorkers. They feel this need to channel this thing that's like brewing underneath them. And it comes out in their work and their art, in their paintings, their performance or whatever. I like my videos to comment on what's happening, like the colonial one where I talk about the Pebble Wall at CVS. That's a direct parody of these white people that came to Hudson in the 90s, and they're like, oh, save the town. But and then they're also very like quote unquote woke, and they talk about colonial this and colonial that. But yet, don't you realize you did the same thing to Hudson? I'm commenting that, and I juxtapose myself with that old 1970s crying Indian ad, of the trash on the side of the highway. And then my sidewalk one I did to be silly, and I was also commenting on hipsters making the mannequins pulled on a rope on a thing, but also talking about Hudson's serious sidewalk and infrastructure issues. And I was really amazed how that kind of took off. When I did that, I got so many DMs and emails and things from people like, oh my God, thank God you're talking about this, because it's a real problem. And then people in the city government started to like talk about it on the radio. And then I took some clips of that radio and put it on my Instagram, and the whole thing kind of blew up, and it started a whole conversation. The mayor was involved about the city's sidewalk problem. So I think even though I'm trying to be funny, I'm trying to be crass, I'm trying to entertain people and myself, I think some good can come of it.
Yeah, you're a force for change. There's all the sidewalks are being fixed. It's amazing.
I notice younger people. My boyfriend, Will McLeod, the artist, he works at Supernatural, and everyone he works with is very young. They're in their 20s. And they all said, oh, I love your sidewalk video. You really talked about an important issue. And, I noticed this very younger generation, they don't quite maybe see things the way older people do. They don't maybe appreciate sarcasm and satire.
Right. They're very earnest. Yeah.
But if you do something and there's some kind of cause behind it that's good, they see great value in that. On my part, that was actually accidental, but I'm happy that so many people find different kinds of value in it.
That's an interesting observation. We would just poke fun from our generation
Right.
for the satire and the SNL value of it.
Yes.
And this generation actually uses it as a tool, maybe for change.
Right. These things can come out of such a small city. I mean, this is like the Last Picture Show kind of.
Yeah.
Everybody knows each other. I love when Eileen Brennan in that movie says you can't sneeze in this town without somebody offering you a handkerchief.
Yeah.
That was something I learned right away when I moved up here from New York City. Like, everybody knows everything you do.
Let's talk about that. My show is very much about for newcomers to the Hudson Valley, not just to Hudson. And so now I'm a newcomer to the Hudson Valley. And now after 10 years, I'm a newcomer to Hudson. I don't know if you remember what it was like to be new, but do you have any advice for Cidiots, for people coming up here to the Valley or to Hudson?
For Cidiots, I love that. So when I moved from the city, what mistakes did I make? Well, what I was just talking about before, be careful what you say, because the rule of life is be careful what you say anywhere, even in a big city like New York, because it's going to get back to them eventually. In Hudson, it gets back to them in less than a second. It's a very small town and everybody knows everybody's business. I would say don't move to Hudson, New York if you're feeling ambitious, about your art or your, career or what have you. I find that people that do well in that arena, it's something on the side. And they've kind of come here you're a good example of this. They come here and you have your podcast and your other things on the side, but you and your partner, because I listened to your podcast, you got a house and you had a garden and everything, like you have your life going on. If you're really still like trying to become like the editor of a big magazine or like have some TV show, maybe stay in New York for a while. Mm-hmm. It's hard to do that kind of thing when you're up here.
Yeah, I feel like everybody up here has like 2 or 3 jobs and a lot of interests, but you're right. But it's also not the workaholic culture. Even though everyone's working a lot, it's not the same kind of career ambition.
Well, when I first moved up here, I'll tell you an observation I made only a year basically living in Hudson, even though we lived in Catskill, was all of our friends decided there were 3 types of people in Hudson. There were, number 1, the locals who had lived here their whole lives, and the town was kind of theirs. Number 2, there were the people that moved from New York that felt like they had made it in some way or other, and they kind of proved themselves, and they came here to get away. But then there was a third type that maybe came from the city and didn't feel like they made it in some capacity. And so they kind of turned Hudson into this showgirls-esque kind of like backstabbing hellscape where it was super competitive and they were trying to like have the gallery this and blog that. So I always thought that was an interesting category. I don't know how true it is, but
no, it's funny because I work in marketing and we talk about segmenting the world into different groups. And Brian and I were talking about the segmentation for Hudson. It was like there's the vacationers, right? And you can spot a slight sense of disappointment, like maybe 2 days was enough. There's the weekend visitors, and they're usually having a shopping bag because they need to have something to show for it. There's the weekenders, who are part-time residents. They're usually wearing New York City gear to remind you that they're from New York City, even though they live here part-time. There's the day trippers, right? So they come over from like Great Barrington. They come for like a meal. They usually don't have a shopping bag because they usually have the same store in Great Barrington. And then there's the originals, the people from here. Uh-huh. And then there's bachelorette parties. And that's basically our segmentation for Hudson. So after 3 weeks.
Oh, that's a lot to keep up with, Matt. You need a chart.
I know. I'm going to make one. I'm going to make a chart. I already made a chart of everything that's open on Hudson every day of the week, like for food. Then maybe I'll do a segmentation post.
Yeah, but you got to make it out of like all organic materials, like wigs and macaroni and, farm to table organic glitter.
All right. So favorite places, because I'm trying to build the giant map. Tell me your favorite place in Hudson and your favorite place outside Hudson.
Ooh. If I had to choose one, I would say TSL is my favorite place in Hudson, Time Space Limited. It's the repertory and first run movie theater that's also an art gallery and a performance space and a bookstore. It's run by Linda Mussman and her partner, Claudia. And it's right off the main strip. And it's this fantastic space. I always tell people, this is how it's done. This is how you should run a place like this. I'm amazed at how inventive they are. I love that they have an art gallery, but the walls aren't white. They're this like raw board, and there's a little stage, and they can have shows. So many things happen at this space. They have a kitchen where they make food. I just love being there. And whenever I'm there, I'm thinking, wow, I wish all the event space in Hudson could be this varied. There's so much happening there. That's my favorite place. And I think it's probably a reflection of what I feel like Hudson or upstate should offer people. It's this arts environment, even though I love the nature. It's funny, I wouldn't say the park or this, I would say it's this event space. But yeah, TSL, I would say, is my favorite place.
And what about if I leave town? Like, where should I go? What's the favorite?
Oh, that's hard. You
can't say Olana.
Olana. Even though I love Olana,
everyone loves Olana.
Recently, Will and I drove all the way up to Lake George, which is a beautiful old town, part of the Borscht Belt kind of town, with old tiki motels and still a lot going on. It's a very touristy town, but it's an old town. And we went because there's this old school 1970s horror wax museum based on, Frankenstein and torture dungeons and things like that. And you just walk around this dark environment that has all these horror sound effects and music playing, and there's wind blowing. And it's been there since the 70s, and it's run by this family. It's very dated. It's very retro. I tend to gravitate towards things like that. We went to see the Wax Museum, but we realized, there's this beautiful town, this beautiful upstate town in Lake George. This is gorgeous. I would say I'm drawn to things like that. I don't have a particular favorite one because, let's face it, when you go upstate, a lot of stuff looks the same, but it's so lush and so beautiful, you're not really complaining. And then you're in Woodstock and you're like, let's visit Woodstock. And then you're like, let's go look at Kate Pearson's motel. And,
Right.
So that's my favorite thing, like going to a destination and along the way, you find all these bizarre things. There's some gorgeous market on the side of the road selling cantaloupes and corn. And, that's my favorite thing.
Do you go to Albany at all? Everybody goes to Albany here.
I have to say I'm impressed with Albany. It is strange to me that there's this huge big city with so much happening. We recently went to an art opening up in Albany, and it was fantastic. It was in a house. Apparently in Albany, the big thing right now is to have art openings that do installations in people's townhouses. But I'm getting sidetracked. So I always thought it was interesting. There's so much happening in Albany, but I'm like, wow, New York City is just 2.5 hours over there. It's odd that you would have this city with such a rich history and such a big scene going on. And there's this great like underground music scene happening in Albany. There's so many like noise artists and weird underground shows.
Oh.
And I'm like, that's so odd. Brooklyn's right over there, but that's New York State for you.
So what are you working on now?
Well, I have 3 videos I do this weird thing where I shoot videos over a period of like a year or two. And I have 3 that I'm working on that are all shot. I'm editing. The next one's going to be about Hudson wildlife. And then I'm also doing one that I'm a little nervous about. I think I'm going to get in trouble for it. It's a review of every art gallery in Hudson. And for the last 2 years, I've gone into all these galleries and secretly shot footage. And I'm going to review all these galleries. The review is kind of framed in a unique framework. It's not exactly a review of the
That's
gallery.
Funny. Yeah.
But I'm a little nervous about putting that one up. And then there's another one that I'm going to do with Will, and it's a cooking show. And we use only materials you can find in the alleys of. I won't tell you what material, but it's plentiful in the alleys of Hudson.
Wait, so let's talk about alleys, because if people aren't from Hudson, we just appreciate this now about having moved here. Is Hudson has an old grid, a little bit like Washington, D.C., where there's alleyways behind the main drags. And so everything backs onto alleys. And there's a whole, like, sometimes if you want to avoid people on Warren Street, just walk down the alley. Like, there's all this stuff happening in the alleys. There's people living in the alleys. Like, I love this alley culture. It's hilarious.
Living. Yeah, you nailed it. I mean, I think everyone realizes this at some point, even just visiting Hudson. The old adage back in the dinner party days, we used to have this saying, you couldn't walk 10 feet in Hudson without getting invited to a dinner party, which you wanted to avoid because there were so many, it was too many of them. So you went into the alley and you walked down the alley. But then there was this horrible, it's like a Twilight Zone kind of twist where then you ran into everyone in the alley that was trying to avoid everyone on Warren Street, and you got into that dinner party. So it was just, there was no hope. But yeah, the alleys of Hudson are fascinating. They kind of remind me of that John Waters movie, Desperate Living, Mortville. They're like these shacks, and you see these weird people hanging out the windows, and it's the alleys are fascinating.
Yeah, you can see the backs of all the houses too, so you can
Yes.
see what's really going on.
Yes. We need an alley for the alley. We need like a tunnel system above, like they had in ancient Italy for the Pope, walking above the streets.
Oh, we need an alley for the alley. That's a great line. It's funny. Thanks for listening to Cidiot. Yes, there's more to the Hudson Valley than Hudson, I promise. But I'll tell you, it's pretty impressive so far. We'll be chatting about FDR and history. And you know what? Send in topics you'd like to hear more about. I wouldn't mind hearing some more Cidiot stories too. Bet you have some juicy ones. I'm Matt Zucker. It's almost leaf peeping time. Well, be more than a creeper. Come visit.
Down in the valley, moved up from the city. It's a new way of living, and I'm trying to get used to it. 1 part poodles, half an ounce of an idiot. Ordered a Manhattan, and they call me a Cidiot. At first I hurt my feelings, but it's kinda got a ring to it. When you move to the country, they can tell when you're new to it. I'm looking at a place, but I'm trying to keep fitting in. It takes too long to be a local, so for now I'm a Cidiot.